So hi guys, we're at 3:15. Just a few more minutes. Let's give your batchmates a little bit of time. We're at 51 participants. I think several more are keen to join in. So just give me a few minutes and we will start. Hi, Professor Sharma. Glad to see that you've joined the webinar as well. Shagata, it's 3:19. We'll have a kickoff at sharp 3:20.
Okay. So I'm just going to start in a minute.
Yeah. I'll quickly introduce you and then you can carry on. Yeah. All right. Very good afternoon, everybody. This is Karan Shah. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon for this very engaging webinar. First and foremost, these are unprecedented times, so I hope that all of you are taking good care of yourselves. With the extension of the lockdown announced, it seems we're going to be in this position for a few weeks. So please take care and take care of the health of your near and dear ones. I'm sure we'll come out of this quickly. As part of our service of keeping students engaged, MDA has been consistently delivering webinars as well as online certificate programs to students. Sorry, my video was off. I'm just going to quickly switch it on. Okay. So, nonetheless, I hope you all can hear me carefully. Guys, I would now, first and foremost, before we move on to introducing Shagata, I'd like to extend a very, very big heartfelt thank you to Daulat Ram College, to the students, a big thank you to the principal, Dr. Roy, as well as the teacher in charge of the economics department, Mrs. Malini Sharma. It's been an absolute pleasure to interact with you all, and thank you for allowing us to engage with your students. I'm sure this will be a very engaging hour and 15 minutes for them. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Shagata Mukherjee, who's an associate professor at the Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics. Shagata is an expert in behavioral and experimental sciences and has got his PhD from Georgia State University in Atlanta in the US. Shagata has been with us for a few years, and he's actually one of India's top experts in the subject. He's been an advisor to central and state governments on building nudge units. He's been conducting fantastic research projects with our students as well as international universities and leading corporations. So you're going to be in a very good pair of hands for the next hour and 15. So Shagata, over to you. These are students from Daulat Ram College, of course, one of the best colleges across TU. Please start whenever possible. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Karan. Just to make sure, can all of you hear me? Just type in yes if you can. Okay, great. Fine. Okay, very good afternoon. Thanks all of you for joining. I hope all of you are staying safe and taking care of your near and dear ones. So without further ado, let's start with the topic. So the idea is for the next hour or so, I'm going to introduce basic concepts and insights of behavioral economics, and we will also discuss them in the context of what's going on around us, in the context of the pandemic and its response by different people as well as governments. In the end, I would try to keep some time to take any questions that any of you might have. Okay, so let's start with the idea. And the first thing that we want to start with is with the basic question as to what is behavioral economics. This is a term that some of you might have heard about, not really sure what it is. Some of you might have heard very recently with the recent Nobel Prizes, while some of you might know about it for the past few years. So what is behavioral economics? Now, it's a discipline that is not taught in most colleges in India yet, so you may not have a chance to have formally learned it. So let's first define what do we mean by behavioral economics. Tanya says my audio keeps breaking time and again. Is that true for everybody? No? Okay. Sorry. That's a confusing question because it doesn't mean what no and yes is. So is all of you can hear me properly except Tanya? or maybe one or two other person, because if it is just a few people, then it's most likely a problem with your internet. You may want to refresh. Whether if others can hear me properly, then okay. So it seems like Tanya and somebody else who also said you may want to refresh and then try again, because it seems like many others can hear. So Ayushi, you may also want to try to do that. Okay. Okay, so Karan, if at any point you can't hear me, just stop me and let me know, because I may not understand at what point I'm no longer audible to most people.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So what is behavioral economics? Behavioral economics is a field of study that incorporates insights from other fields and disciplines, not just in economics but in other social sciences as well, such as psychology, sociology, political science, social anthropology, etc., to explain how people behave in the real world. As opposed to what? As opposed to how people should behave in your textbooks. So behavioral economics develops alternative explanations about human behavior. Now, alternative to the standard neoclassical economics that we typically learn in our courses. Now, sometimes it is done as a specific, well worked out theory, and sometimes it's just an insight from psychology. And we will see examples of both kinds pretty soon. Okay, so what is the key insight in behavioral economics? The key insight in behavioral economics is that it looks at human decision making as a process, as opposed to an endpoint of that process, which typical mainstream economics thinks about. So the way mainstream economics thinks about decision making is that it thinks about that agents are given certain end rules and people behave as if they're following those end rules. What are those end rules? End rules such as the consumers choose at a point where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Firms produce at a point where their marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Or prices set at a point where demands equal supply. So standard mainstream economics thinks assumes that people follow these end rules to decide, and that's how they sort of optimize their decisions. But behavioral economics says, hang on, that's not how people behave at all in the real world. For example, consumers do not really calculate their marginal benefit to their marginal cost every time they make a decision. Now think about this fact that, take a very simple example. Let's say you're feeling a little hungry, listening to me, and you want like a little bit of afternoon snack. Okay? And you may want to go to your kitchen and grab a pack of cookies that you had bought. So when you actually bought that cookie, let's assume that's before the lockdown, so when you could go to the store, how did you, let's say you have the chocolate chip cookie that you bought. Now, how did you buy it? There are lots of different varieties of cookies that are available in the store, right? You have oatmeal raisin, you have honey, you have lots of different options. So did you guys calculate your marginal benefit to your marginal cost for all different varieties of cookies available in the store and then chose the chocolate chip? No, right? Nobody behaves in that way. If you do, go see a doctor. Because nobody does it. Not even mainstream neoclassical economists would do that. But then something must have guided your decision-making process, right? Something must have gone through your head that made you choose the chocolate chip over the other cookies. And that's what behavioral economics is interested in. Behavioral economists, they are interested in getting inside your head and trying to figure out what is the decision-making process that led you to choose chocolate chip over other types of cookies. Now, you may not always be aware or conscious about the decision-making process, but a behavioral economist will. So that's what I mean when I say that the key insight of behavioral economics is that it thinks about decision-making as a process, as opposed to some end rules that just people are following like robots. Now, I started by saying that behavioral economics, some of you might have heard about this term fairly recently, maybe in the last few years, with the few Nobel Prizes in this field. But actually, behavioral, and it's still a pretty new subject in India. It's hardly taught anywhere in the country yet. However, behavioral economics is not a new idea in economics. Right? All of these might lead you to think that it's a very new discipline. It's actually not. Now, does any of you know what is sort of the starting point of standard mainstream modern economics? If any of you know, feel free to write in the chat box. So modern economics starts with a very specific, well, actually it starts with the publication of a very specific book by a very famous economist in a particular year. So if any of you know what that book is and what the year of publication is and who the person is, write in your chat box. Yes, the answers are coming. Yes, Bhavya, you're right. Samriddhi, you're also right. Wealth of Nations, it starts with the publication of Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and that was in 1776. So that is sort of taken as the starting point of mainstream economics. Now, few years before writing Wealth of Nations, in 1759, Adam Smith wrote another book, and that book is called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Now, in that book, Smith actually talked about all the basic principles of behavioral economics. So he told about behavioral economics and the basic insights of behavioral economics actually well before he wrote Wealth of Nations, and well before modern economics, mainstream economics as we know it, started. But sadly, those ideas kind of got lost. Why did they get lost? It's because nobody really read Theory of Moral Sentiments. I mean, very few people have actually read Wealth of Nations end to end, but almost nobody read Theory of Moral Sentiments. Even most economists have not bothered reading it. This book was just not trending at that point, right? So therefore, Smith's ideas kind of got lost. And it's over the last few decades that we have actually started reviving those ideas of Smith. And that process of revival actually starts with this guy, Herbert Simon, in 1955, where he wrote this very insightful paper. If any of you are interested, the title is here. You can go and read the actual paper. So this was the first behavioral theory that came about, and it was called the theory of bounded rationality. Now, what is this idea of bounded rationality? This idea of bounded rationality is that Herbert Simon basically said that human beings are not fully rational as assumed by standard mainstream economics. They have a lot of limitations. For example, they might have limited cognitive ability, they might have limited memory, they might have limited ability to process lots of different information. So we are not fully rational. We are not taking into account everything when we are making a choice, but we are rational within a certain bound. So that was the basic idea of theory of bounded rationality. It was a very, very powerful idea that led to a lot of different research within economics. And how did this turn out for Herbert Simon? Pretty well. He won a Nobel Prize in 1978 for this theory. But the name of Herbert Simon is not necessarily associated as, as a behavioral economist so much. And even if you ask all behavioral economists, they would not necessarily name Herbert Simon. And the reason for that is Herbert Simon himself did not consider himself as a behavioral economist. In fact, he said that the word behavioral economics is a pleonasm. Does any of you know what the word pleonasm means by any chance? Well, if any of you are preparing for GRE, you might know. It's new concept? No. It's that kind of a word, right? That we don't really use in every day. So the word pleonasm basically means something like redundant. It's like saying black darkness or burning fire. Now, why did Herb Simon said behavioral economics is a pleonasm? It's because he said that behavioral economics is a pleonasm because isn't the job of all of economics trying to understand behavior? Now, consumer theory is trying to understand consumer behavior, producer theory is trying to understand producer behavior, theory of the firms are trying to understand behavior in different markets and firms. So he said that if the business of economics is not to understand behavior, then what is it? So he said that there's no point of calling myself a behavioral economist. I should just call myself an economist because any good economist should actually understand behavior. And that's the reason we have not necessarily sort of labeled him as a behavioral economist. So the story of behavioral economics in the popular parlance actually starts with these guys, the modern gurus of behavioral economics, Kahneman and Tversky. This is Daniel Kahneman and this is Amos Tversky. So interestingly, none of them are economists. They are both cognitive psychologists, but they won the first sort of formal thinking fast and slow. That's true. So we're going to talk about that. So they won the first formal Nobel Prize in economics in behavioral economics in 2002. In fact, they didn't win. Only Kahneman won because the rules of the game is that you have to be alive to win a Nobel Prize, and Amos sadly passed away a few years before. But had he been alive, he would have certainly won the Nobel Prize as well. So instead, Kahneman shared his Nobel Prize with Vernon Smith, who is considered as the father of experimental economics, which is a very related field to behavioral economics. Now, incidentally, the work for which Vernon won the Nobel Prize, much of that work was jointly done with my PhD supervisor, James Fox, who is also a very famous behavioral and experimental economist. But we are not going to talk about Vernon and Jim's work. We're going to talk about Kahneman and Tversky's work and their ideas into behavioral economics. So what is their big idea? Their big idea in behavioral economics is the idea of two systems, which they call System 1 and System 2. This is explained, as Bhavya mentioned, in great details in the book Thinking Fast and Slow. So the System 1 is an automatic system, which is uncontrolled, effortless, associative, fast, unconscious, skilled. And System 2 is a reflective system, which is controlled, effortful, deductive, slow, self-aware, and rule-following. Now, it is not the case that some people are System 1 and some people are System 2. It's the case that all of us are both System 1 and System 2. Sometimes our System 1 takes over and sometimes our System 2 takes over. So, for example, when you're playing football, you're using your System 1, or when you're driving, you're using your System 1, and when you're giving a math test, you're hopefully using your System 2. So that's the idea. Now, this System 1 thinking often leads to something which is very popular in behavioral economics, a term which is called heuristics. So what is heuristics? Heuristics are basically mental processes. They are rules of thumbs. And we use them all the time. Why do we use them? Because if we don't use them, if we have to calculate and optimize every time we have to buy a pack of cookies or buy anything for that matter, or do anything with our time, if you have to always calculate and optimize, then life would be cognitively very, very taxing, right? So in order to cut some slacks to our mind, we use these mental processes, these rules of thumbs, these heuristics. And they often work pretty well. But sometimes they lead to biases. And Kahneman and Tversky discuss these different kinds of biases. Now, I'm going to give you a sense of the most important kind of biases that they are. So here we go. So the first one is anchoring. Now, what is anchoring? Anchoring is the tendency to rely heavily on one prior suggested piece of information when making a decision. So what we're going to do is we're going to understand these heuristics Let's try to understand these heuristics, and let's at the same time trying to apply them in how people are thinking, how people and governments are thinking around us in these times, right? In their response to COVID-19. So, how are we using anchoring at this point? So, lots of governments are actually using this anchoring heuristic. Now, one big problem about the present situation is that it's all very new to all of us. Right? So all of us, regardless of your age, all of us are facing this for the first time in our life, at least in this life. Maybe you have, in your previous lives, if you've lived through the Spanish flu, you have some idea of it. But all of us in this life are facing, certainly this is for the first time, right? So it's true for all the doctors, so it's true for all the policymakers, right? So the problem, therefore, is there is no playbook for this. We don't know what the answers are, right? So we are trying to kind of get the answers as we go along, create those answers as we go along. So a big thing that's used, so big problem, for example, is testing, right? So big problem that in India we are facing is about testing. Just today, the Supreme Court gave a verdict, sort of changed the initial position and gave a verdict that will provide free testing to only poor households, and for others, you'll be charged 4,500 rupees for testing kits. So testing is really big issue right now. But the problem is, we know that we need to test, but there's of course a trade-off, right? We don't have enough testing kits. We ordered lots from China. They were supposed to come earlier this month. They haven't arrived. We are hoping it will come by tomorrow, but there's no guarantee. So who should we test? Of course, the more we can test, the better, but we can't test everybody. So of course, you should test people who are with symptoms. But should we just stop at that? Should we also test asymptomatic people? Should we also test random people? So the answer is not very clear, right? So what's the proportion of people who should be tested? So what lots of state governments in India did, in fact, some of my students at the academy who took the courses are actually now advising the government of Maharashtra and the government of Goa in trying to go about how to do this testing business. And so what they're doing essentially is they are anchoring themselves to a certain value of testing that's been done in other countries, like countries like South Korea. So they're anchoring themselves to the number of tests that South Korea did. And then they're taking a proportion of the population density there and then recalibrating it to the local population density of each district, sub-districts, zonal areas, cities, wards, states. And that's how the government is trying to figure out what is the optimal number of testing. So they're anchoring to the value that's already been done in South Korea, for example, and then adjusting it to their local population density. Right? So that's the heuristic we are using because we don't know the exact number. Right? So that's the mental processes that many of our policymakers are actually using. The second is availability heuristic, and this is, while anchoring is really important for the policymakers, this availability heuristic is something that all of us individually are using. So the question that all of us are really caring about, even if it's not explicitly, that's what is the one question that it's really bothering all of us, is what is the likelihood of myself being infected by the virus, right? So that's the big question that all of us are scared of, right? And in extension to that, what is the likelihood of my family getting it, my loved one getting it, and all of that, right? So the availability, and that's where availability heuristic plays a very big role. So availability heuristic is basically examining the likelihood of risks by asking how readily examples come to mind. So now let's see if we how we can use this in trying to answer that question. So when we are trying to estimate the probability of risk of us catching the virus, and of course we are worried about it, that's why we are not stepping out, that's why we are not doing anything rash, because we want to reduce that probability, we want to reduce that likelihood of that risk, right? But that risk is still there. So how much is that risk? And then the second question is, if somebody catches the virus, what's the probability of actually dying, right? That's the worst outcome. Now, of course, there is some objective probability, some objective measure of risk. We know, for example, that the mortality rate from this virus objectively is not very high. Of course, it varies across regions and age and sex, but generally the mortality rates are not very high. For example, most of your students, young people, so for you guys, the mortality rates are, and especially if you're a girl, the mortality rate is pretty low. So that's the objective probability, right? And if you're staying at home and not going out and not interacting with people, maintaining social distancing, even your risk is pretty low. So, but that's an objective probability. And we are seeing the numbers every day in the newspapers, in social media, all of that. But that's not how we really process the risk in our head. We process the risk in our head through stories. So, for example, if you hear that somebody in your next building has caught the virus, and worse, have actually died from the virus, then you will feel that you will feel actually much more scared, right? You will feel that now you have a much higher chance of catching the virus. Although you're staying at home, you're actually not going out and to your next building, and nobody from your next building is allowed to come inside. And it's not airborne, so it can't really come. But still, if you hear that, you will actually feel a lot more scared than if you hear in the newspaper that 900 people in New York died, for example, or even lots of people in Delhi got affected. So why is that? It's because we think about risk in terms of thinking about how readily examples come to mind. So the moment you hear about somebody in your next building catching the virus, that example will readily come to your mind, and that example will kind of loom large in your head. Right? So therefore here, we will be using this availability heuristic, this availability of the stories that are coming to our mind, specific stories as opposed to objective probabilities, to try to analyze, right? You're not analyzing maybe the person who caught the virus in your next building was an old person of age maybe 70 and above. Maybe that person came back from, had a travel history. You had none of these things. So your objective probability is low, but still if you hear somebody in your next building catching a virus and dying from it, you will feel pretty scared, right? That's availability heuristic, I think. Now the next one is optimism and overconfidence. Now this is the idea that people are unrealistically optimistic and overconfident about their abilities. This is something which is actually pretty relevant to you all as a group. So students have been shown to be particularly vulnerable to this. Now the example that I have is with drivers. Now 90% of all drivers think that they are above average behind the wheel. You all know in normal times, whenever you go out on the streets of Delhi, you all know that that's true, right? Every driver thinks that he's better than the driver in the other car, and it's always the fault of the driver in the other car, right? And of course, the driver in the other car also thinking the same thing. But it's not just true for drivers. It's like I said, it's true for. Can I please share the screen again? Okay. I think my screen was already shared. Okay, so let me stop sharing and then share it again. Okay. Let me share the screen again. Okay, I have done that. Can you confirm if you can see the screen now?
Yes, Shagata is visible.
We can see the screen now. Okay, great. Okay, so I was talking about optimism and overconfidence and how students are particularly prone to that. So in a study, students were asked that how many of you think that you belong to the top 10% of the class? And much like to these drivers, 90% of students thought that they belong to the top 10% of the class. Now, of course, that's not possible. Only 10% can belong to the top 10%. But most people think that they're better than others, right? The same is true for young people's initial response at least to the virus. They thought that somehow they were overtly optimistic and overconfident that it will not happen to them. So when the lockdown was not enforced, but still social distancing was advised, not just in India but everywhere else, lots of young people were still going to pubs and bars and cafes and hanging out with each other and their friends. And that's sort of optimism and overconfidence bias. They were thinking that they are somehow prone to the virus, right? But it's not just young peoples. In fact, we have seen this time and again in response to different governments also. Lots of governments have shown at the early stage this optimism and overconfidence bias, which has actually led them to pretty detrimental results. Like we have seen examples of countries like Italy, who did not go for a lockdown at initial stages and paid heavy price for that. But the most famous, or let's say the most infamous example of this has come from Mr. Trump, who at the initial stage in early March, when the number of cases found in US was 15, only 15. He very, famously or infamously said at that point that, oh, the numbers are only 15, that's a great number, and very soon the number will be very close to 0. What did he have to back that? What evidence did he have to back that? Well, nothing, right? It was just purely his optimism or confidence bias, and we saw that that was not at all true. Very soon the number 15 went to 50, then 150, then 1050, then 1500, then 15,000, then 150,000, and right now the numbers are absolutely completely skyrocketed beyond control. More than 1 lakh of people is just affected in New York. They have stopped counting the bodies in New York. So it's just a terrible situation, right? And a lot of it is, and sometimes rightly blamed to the optimism and overconfidence bias that lots of governments have shown around the world at the initial stage of dealing with this. Right now, of course, they have all been hit hard. Yesterday, Mr. Trump's dear friend has passed away from the virus. So right now, nobody's taking it lightly. But at the initial stage, we did see this bias. Now, the final one is framing. And this is the tendency to rely on the context in which a choice is described when making a decision. So, example of this is information campaign framed in terms of losses is typically far more effective than information campaign framed in terms of an equivalent gain. Now, this is something which is actually been used by lots of different governments, and particularly government in India, to good effects in trying to deal with the situation of the pandemic. So we have actually seen this in the information campaign of the governments, particularly in case of the lockdown policy. Right? So when the government gave out information about the lockdown, it has been framed in terms of losses. Right? We have been told that we should all stay at home, we should maintain social distancing, we should not go out no matter what the cost is, because if we don't do so, we have a very heavy chance of losing our health and at the worst case losing our life, right? And that seemed to work by and large. That has seemed to work pretty well. People have stayed at home with, they've seen some grave exceptions to that, but by and large that has worked well. And just today, as we all know, the lockdown has been extended, and using the same frame, right? So we still need to use this because the danger is not over. We are still, it's actually still increasing at an increasing rate, which means we are not flattening the curve yet, and therefore further lockdown is required. So that's the frame, the frame of fear of loss, and that seems to be working by and large. And why is that working? Why are we behaving that way? That is because, as governments already know, thanks to Kahneman and Tversky, that people are what is called loss averse. And this was the idea that Kahneman and Tversky used to come up with the theory, which is called prospect theory, and which actually won them the Nobel Prize. So So let's try and understand very intuitively what is the idea of prospect theory. So basically, prospect theory says that people make decisions based on potential value of losses and gains rather than the final outcome. And the key feature of this is loss aversion. So what is the idea of loss aversion? The idea of loss aversion is pretty simple. Let's think about a very simple example to try and understand this. Let's say I tell you that all of you have decided to spend the afternoon listening to me, learning about behavioral economics. So before all of you leave the session, I'm going to pay all of you 100 rupees. I'm going to Paytm to you 100 rupees to all of you. So how is that going to make you feel? Not bad, right? Maybe to some even pretty good. You might think that, oh, that's not bad. I can order online that type of chocolate cookies you were talking about. Maybe. Now let's think of a different situation, right? So let's say I'm not going to give you 100 rupees. Instead, I tell you that you have. I've been telling you about the behavioral economics. You've been learning about all of these and how it can explain what's going on in the world around us right now. So for all of that, before all of you leave, here is my Paytm number. Please pay me 100 rupees, all of you, before you leave. How is that going to make all of you feel? Pretty pissed, right? You might think that it's a different question. I'm listening to you, but on top of that, you want money. And chances are that me asking 100 rupees from you is going to make you feel much more pissed than if I were to give you 100 rupees, right? And that's the idea of loss aversion. The idea of loss aversion is basically that losing something makes you much more miserable, as gaining the same thing makes you feel happy. Or in other words, that losses loom larger than gains, right? And this idea is actually quite widespread, right? The idea is pretty simple, which is that we all want to win, but we really hate to lose. And that's something that all of us understand at some intuitive level, right? So that's the idea of loss aversion. Okay. So that's sort of the description of Kahneman and Tversky's contribution to behavioral economics. And now we move to Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in Behavioral Economics in 2017, very recently. And this is him right after winning the Nobel Prize. He's posing his prize with a slight smile on his face. And just as we looked at Kahneman and Tversky's contribution to behavioral economics, let's now look at Thaler's big contribution to behavioral economics and the reason he won the Nobel Prize. And that big contribution is the idea of nudge theory, right, which is in this book called Nudge. So at the academy, I teach a full course on behavioral and experimental economics, and in that course, this book Nudge is my one of my textbooks. So in this book Thaler co-authored with Kassanstein. So they explain the nudge theory and also explain lots of different examples of that. So what is nudge? So they basically say that nudge is a paternalistic libertarian policy. Now that's a mouthful. I'll try to explain that in the next slide. But you can think about nudge in a very simple way. So nudge is something that tries to influence behavior, but without mandating it. Right. Let me say that again, because that's a very simple working definition of nudge. Nudge is something that tries to influence human behavior, but without mandating. So it uses knowledge of behavioral bias to set defaults or frames to help avoid people to to become to essentially avoid people of these biases, right? Now it always retains the original choice option, so better policy at no cost in terms of removing choices. So Thaler and Sunstein say that a nudge is a libertarian paternalism, and now that may sound like an oxymoron, but they argue that it's actually not. They say that it has both aspects. The libertarian aspect here comes from the fact that a nudge is liberty preserving, that people should be free to do what they are and to opt out of undesirable arrangements if they want to do so. Now the paternalistic aspect here comes from the fact that the policy tries to influence behavior, like I mentioned before, in a way that will make choosers better off, and this is the important part, as judged by themselves. Not by their parents, not by their teachers, not by the state, but as judged by themselves. So choice architects can try to influence people's behavior in order to make their lives longer, healthier, and better. So the next question is, when do we need it? When do we need a nudge? Now we need a nudge first and foremost in a situation of fraught choices. What is a fraught choice? Now fraught choice is a situation where the benefit and the cost is separated over time. So it could be such that the benefit is now, cost is later. And what are that kind of situations? Those are situations of drinking, smoking, fatty foods, etc. Right? So instant gratification. You get the benefit now and you face the cost later. Like those of you, and some of you maybe who are smokers, where smoking in normal times, you only face the benefit now, benefit at that point, but you are likely to face heavily the cost right now, right? Of course, apart from the very high chance of catching a lung cancer, also the smokers right now have a much higher likelihood of being badly affected by the virus, because it directly affects the lungs, right? So, but of course, when somebody was smoking in normal times, they were not thinking that, oh, maybe I was at some point a virus will come, and if I smoke now, I will have a much higher likelihood of being badly affected by an unknown virus that may or may not come sometimes in the future, right? So therefore, you were not reducing your smoking. That's the problem of fraught choice, right? But it could go the other way around as well. It could be that the costs are right now, the benefits are later, right? So the simple example of that, savings, investments, yes. Those who were not saving enough are facing the problem right now, because you need those savings right now, as many people are out of jobs, etc. Right? But also in terms of the lockdown, the social distancing, those are all things like that. The cost is right now. We can't go out. We can't go out to get stuffs. We can't go out to do the things that we want to. But of course, the benefits are in the future. That the more we bear the cost right now, the sooner we will all get out of this situation. We'll flatten the curve, and we will be facing a I'm reluctant to say normalcy, because we don't know what that is anymore. We'll certainly, but whatever the new normal becomes, right? Now the next case where we require harder choices is in case of harder choice, like retirement planning, right? Or for you guys, something like, let's say, career choice, right? Or a choice right now that, whether I should go for a job or whether I should go for higher studies, right? Something like that. Also for infrequent choices, right? So choosing, for example, choosing a college or a spouse. These are choices that we don't do pretty often, right? So, for example, outside of Bollywood, most of us will choose a spouse maybe once, twice, or thrice in our life, right? So that's not a high number given our 70 to 80 years of life. That's pretty infrequent choice, right? Then, in case of no experience, like if you're in a new country, you don't know how to navigate it, But most importantly, in this case, in the case of low feedback, that's when a nudge can really help. So let's think about a very simple but yet example that many of us must have faced at some point in our life. So many of us on New Year's Eve, 31st December, we make this New Year resolutions, right? And a very common resolution that many of us have made or will make at some point of time is that, we say to ourselves that from this coming year, and in fact, for many parts of India, today is actually their New Year day. So, for example, I'm from Bengal. Today is the Bengali New Year. So many might be doing it right now. So we say to ourselves that from this coming year, we will stay healthy. We will lose weight. We will go to the gym and do all of that stuff, right? So many of us say that particularly on 31st night when we take New Year resolutions. And what happens? So let's say, and we are very determined, we are very motivated that we're going to do this year and we're going to be healthy, lose weight and all of that, right? So 1st of January morning, most of us are not in a situation to go to the gym. But so let's leave that. But 2nd Jan morning, we wake up, we are very enthused about it. We are very motivated. We go hit the gym. We work out for 2 hours. We come back. We stand on our weighing machine. We look down. And what do we see? Nothing. We weigh exactly the same as we did before we went. Right? So we keep on doing this for a week. We keep on coming back, looking down at our weighing machine. We see no change. By the 10th day, we start getting demotivated. By the 15th of Jan, we stop going at all. Right? And then again on 31st December, we tell ourselves, okay, this year I'm going to the gym. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to be healthy and all of that. Right? And that cycle continues. So what's happening here? What's happening here is that, of course, if you go to the gym for 10 days, you're not supposed to lose weight, right? You have to go for a certain threshold number of days before you actually start seeing changes in your body. But we are not getting feedback. We are getting very low feedback, which makes us demotivated. So a simple nudge here, which is very widespread, and many of you use it even without maybe understanding that it's a nudge, are things like Fitbits or smartwatches. So what do? They give you feedback in real time, right? Of course, you don't lose weight every day you go to the gym, but it tells you that you've burned 2,000 calories, you've done 10,000 steps. It monitors your heart rate. So seeing all of that feedback in real time keeps you motivated, keeps you going back to the gym, and keeps you going there till you reach that certain threshold number of days, after which you start seeing the changes. Now, it's a nudge because it influences behavior without mandating it, right? Nobody's forcing you to wear the Fitbit or the smartwatch. You can throw it away. But if you do use it, then it nudges you to reach your objective, which was to live healthy, to go to the gym, and to lose weight, right? So that's how nudges can work. Now let's see 2 concrete examples of nudges in action. And there are 2 examples here, one from the cartoon world, one from the real world. So we'll start with the example from the cartoon world. Can any of you recognize this cartoon character, this guy here? If you can, feel free to write in the chat box. Yes. Simpson. Homer Simpson. That's the guy, right? So for those of you who don't know Homer Simpson, you need to know 2 things about him. First is that he's lazy, and second is that he loves donuts. Well, pretty much anything unhealthy, but particularly donuts. So here in this example, what happens is Homer walks into the corner store. You can see there's nobody else there, just him. He's maintaining social distancing. He's quite far away from there. Only the cop was monitoring it. although nobody's wearing a mask here, which is not good, but this is in US, so they're out of masks, right? So maybe that's why. So Homer has come in, and so Homer is hungry, and this store owner knows Homer for a long time, cares about his health, wants Homer to eat healthy in these times, don't want Homer to just keep on eating more and more sugar. So what he has done is that he has placed all the fruits right in front of the table, and he has put the donuts way back in the store here, right? Why? Because he knows Homer is lazy, right? So he doesn't want to walk that much. So Homer has come in, seen that, and he says, the donuts are way over there, I think I'll have some fruits instead. And the store owner says that my cunning choice architecture of putting the fruits closer and the donuts far away will soon have Homer eating healthy, right? So see, here this guy has nudged Homer to eat healthy. Why is it a nudge? It's because he has tried to influence Homer's behavior by putting the fruits right here without mandating it. See, he still kept the donuts. It's not that the donuts are not available anymore, right? So if Homer wants, he can still eat the donuts. All he has to do is to walk all the way, right? But it's easier for him to have fruits, and therefore this guy has nudged him to have fruits. So that's the example from the cartoon world. Now let's look at the example from the real world. And this is in Chicago, the Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. As you can see, it's a beautiful drive right by the lake, and it's a lovely road. So what people would often do is people would speed up. But the problem with that is there is a sharp turn around here, and if you're not careful, it can lead to accident. In worst case, you can actually even drive into the lake. So what the city of Chicago did was that they did something very curious and interesting. They drew some white lines on the road. Okay. Now, as you can see here, these white lines are far away from each other here and very close to each other as you approach the turn. Now, what does this do? This gives to the driver an optical illusion that you're speeding up, and therefore it nudges you to slow down. Now, I have driven on this road 3 times to test this, and it actually works. And it works even after the first time. Why? Because the knowledge that this white lines are there is something that your system 2 knows. But when you're driving with your system 1. It's muscle memory, right? So even if you know why these white lines are for, it still works. It still nudges you to slow down. And it's a nudge because it influences behavior without mandating it. It's not that if you speed up, some cop is going to come and give you a ticket. It's not even speed breakers. Just some white lines on the street. And if you want, you can ignore them. But if you don't, it'll nudge you to slow down and be safe. And the same kind of examples we are seeing in these times in India as well. So I'm sure you must have seen this in newspapers or in social media somewhere, that to maintain social distancing in front of kirana stores or in the bazaar, what many of the local governments have done is that they have drawn these white circles, right? And to indicate that people should stand within those white circles, and those circles are away from each other, and therefore if everybody stands on those white circles, you maintain social distancing, right? So that's the same kind of nudge, right, to maintain safety. What is it? I mean, it's most of the times you will see that it's not like there is some cop who's standing and actually monitoring, and there is some fine that if you step outside, or it's like if you just step outside of that circle, a laser beam is going to come and hit on your feet. Nothing like that, right? It's just some white lines made up, drawn with chalk. But it nudges you to stay within that and nudges people to be safe by maintaining social distance. right? So that's a nudge that we are using everywhere, in every city, right? I've seen lots of these pictures in markets in Delhi. Maybe if you have gone out, you have seen that, or maybe you have stood on those circles yourselves, right? So that's an example of nudge in action that we are seeing with the same objective of keeping people healthy, right? Now the question is, who are doing these things? Who are the people who are doing these things? Now the first formal institution who started doing this was the Behavioural Insights team in the UK. So they were, they're popularly called the Nudge Unit. It started in 2010 with under the with Richard Thaler as the advisor, and with David Hartlin as the director of the Nudge Unit. It started as part of the Prime Minister's cabinet at that point, but now it's a full-fledged organization on its own. So that was the first Nudge Unit in the world, and it's soon followed by lots of other different units, such as the Danish Nudging Network, the Swedish Nudging Network, Nudge France, European Nudge Network, White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, which had Kassan Steen as the advisor. This was started during the Obama administration. I actually don't know what's the fate of this team, given that most people in White House do not believe in sciences anymore. I think this doesn't exist. Certainly, Kassan Steen has moved out, and he's now teaching at Harvard. But certainly, the other ones are still there, and they're working. Especially the ones in Europe are actually doing lots of different nudges, implementing different nudges right now to tackle the pandemic, and particularly in cases where there hasn't been an enforced lockdown, how do you keep people, how do you make people stay inside home, and things like that, right? But this is, more importantly, this is not something which is happening only in the West or only in the developed countries. This is something which is happening very much in India as we speak. It's happening in your own city. It's happening in lots of other places in India. So, if you have read the economic survey in 2017, the economic survey in 2017 talks about the need to start nudge units in India. And in fact, in the early 2018, I was called by the Chief Minister's office in Maharashtra, where we kind of proposed a nudge unit that was supposed to come by the state government of Maharashtra. While that formation of that nudge unit is still underway, last year we initiated the first nudge unit in India in Punjab, which was the Punjab Nudge Initiative by the government of Punjab. So we went there in Mohali, and we trained all the government officials, the IAS, IPS, and principal secretaries in behavioral economics, the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. I taught them about heuristics, biases, nudge theory, and how those can be implemented for the government in Punjab. And just a few months ago, a big push has come from Niti Aayog. So Niti Aayog has actually started a central nudge unit, which they have been proposed for a while now. They've started the central nudge unit. Bill Gates came to sign the start of the nudge unit, and they have actually, in fact, even started hiring people as behavioral economists and behavioral scientists to be part of that nudge unit. So, in fact, last year November, the website of Niti Aayog had posted job applications for students in behavioral economics, and those positions got, I think they already got pulled by now, and very soon they're going to come up with a second wave of applications. So if any of you are interested in making a career in behavioral economics, this is a great time, because as Niti Aayog would formally launch the behavioral nudge unit, hopefully at some time when we are past all this, there will be lots of and they're already using this in lots of ways, but it will just happen more and more. And with lots of other state governments also starting lunch units, there will be a lot of demand for behavioral economists in India in the next 5 years or so. Right. So, if you want to know more about this stuff, if you want to know more about behavioral economics, where to go? How do you learn this? So, as I mentioned before, I teach a full course on behavioral and experimental economics at the academy. So what you can do is you can go to the academy's website, just Google Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics, go to the website and go to my faculty profile page. There you will find resources about behavioral economics. You'll find a YouTube video of mine where I talk about the course on behavioral economics. And if you also go to the research page at the Academy's website, you will find research done by me and other students at the Academy on behavioral economics, and all of those research are done in India. So how we have applied behavioral economics to understand different aspects in different things, you will be able to learn that. What I'm also going to do before I end the lecture is that I'm also going to introduce you to some books in behavioral economics that you can actually use this time to maybe explore some of those books and learn more about this. So let me take you through those. So some of the earliest books are the ones by Kahneman and Tversky. These ones, they are classics, but as all classics, they're not very easy reads. So I won't recommend you starting with these books, but they're certainly classics. A better book to start with is this one, Winner's Curse by Thaler. Then these are interesting books. Predictably Rational by Dan Ariely. This is a very interesting book. Then Animal Spirit, a book written by George Attledorf and Robert Shiller. Robert Shiller won the Nobel Prize for Behavioral Finance. These are interesting books. So, and especially if you're interested in behavioral finance, you should read this one, as well as this book, Irrational Exuberance by Shiller. These are very, very important books in behavioral finance. Behavioral finance, by the way, is a area that is having a lot of impact. Some of my students last year who took the course are actually working as behavioral researchers in lots of different finance firms who are applying this. So a big way of using this is lots of investment banking, finance are using this, right? So if you want to actually read about behavioral investment banking, there are specific books like these ones which talk about these. Wealth management is using this a lot, and probably going to be using this much more now that people, investors are going to be behaving much more quote unquote irrationally right now in panic. So this idea will become more and more important. And then behavioral policy, which is what I am primarily interested about. The work I do is Nudge is a great book. I'll recommend all of you to read it. And this another one. Now in behavioral development, there are two really good books. I also teach a course at the Academy on public policy of development, where these two are two of my textbooks. And the students really enjoy it. I would recommend all of you to also read this, particularly this one, Core Economics by Abhijit and Esther. So in this book, basically summarizes all the work for which Abhijit and Esther won the Nobel Prize this year. And most of this work is actually done in India. So I'd highly recommend you to read it. You learn a lot about economics, you learn a lot about social policy in India, and you also learn a lot about behavioral biases, particularly for poor people. And then some recent popular books, finally. Thinking Fast and Slow, somebody mentioned at the beginning, by Daniel Kahneman. So these are all reference books in my course, and I recommend all of these highly. Then Y-axis by Urignese and John List. John is the head of economics department at University of Chicago. This is a very, very interesting book. And then Thaler's Misbehaving, where Thaler talks about the story of behavioral economics throughout the ages. Right. So these are books that I'd recommend all of you to read. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some good books to start with, certainly. You can actually also find lots of online resources. So go to the page and you'll probably find more resource there. Okay, so I'm going to stop at this point with the lecture. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to keep your if you have any questions, keep writing them in your chat box. I'll keep going through them, and meanwhile I will invite Karan to have a few words. And while Karan talks to you guys, I'll go through the chat box, and then I'll take your questions and at the end. Okay. So
sounds good, Shagata.
All right. So Karan, over to you.
Yeah. So I hope everyone can see and hear me. So am I audible? Can everybody see me? Please, can you all type a yes in the chat box? Okay, great. So just a second, I'm going to share my screen. So, all right, guys, first and foremost, many thanks for being such patient listeners. I really appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed the session. Please do keep your questions on the chat box. It's very important to engage. And after I'm done talking briefly about the Academy, Shagata can take some questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm calling to basically introduce to you the Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics. A lot of you guys are interested in economics. A lot of you students may be final year students and may just be wondering what y'all can do post the lockdown, what kind of career opportunities you have after the end of the course. And I'm hoping that at the end of this, you will find yourself a suitable option for consideration. So I don't know how many of y'all have heard about us, but the Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics is a leading postgraduate academy which was formed back in 2015 by some of India's leading economists and financial professionals. So we offer two courses, a postgraduate diploma full-time year-long course in economics and a full-time year-long course in data science and finance. And as you can see, both our courses are offered jointly with the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, which is a leading economics college based in Pune. So as I told you, basically in 2015, practitioners like Ajit Ranade, like Niranjan Rajadaksh, whom y'all would be reading frequently about in their columns in the newspapers, got together with Lord Desai, and they were complaining about the quality of students that they're being able to find in the job market. Now, while they used to go to top master's courses like the Delhi School of Economics, like the JNU, like ISI, like IGIDR, the main issue they were finding with those students were the amount of theoretical knowledge that the students had, but unfortunately they could not apply to the real world. Now, as India is integrated more and more with the world, what happens around us has a huge implication on our economy. It's very, very important to understand from a practical standpoint the concepts and structures of macro and microeconomics. So Lord Desai was in that room, of course, and he said to them that there was no need for students to spend 50, 70, 80 lakhs, come to the London School of Economics where he taught for 35 years. He wanted to bring a LSE style and standard course and curriculum to India. So under his leadership, the academy was formed in 2015. We were lucky to have the then Governor Raghuram Rajan deliver the first lecture. And ever since then, we've now trained 5 batches of students. More than 200 students have graduated from the academy. A lot of them have come from some of the leading colleges in Delhi University. And these students are now, they moved on to do wonderful things in the corporate world and the world of academia. So what really differentiates us, right? Firstly, at the academy, we're absolutely independent. So our curriculum design and delivery is very agile. It keeps us with the demand of what the corporates are demanding from students. We have a very, very strong focus on applied learning, right? So basically, we want to not only teach textbook concepts, but also show how these concepts are applied in the real world. Typically, we don't train more than 60 students in any batch, which allows us to have a strong focus on individuals. And of course, because we're an academy that is formed by some of industry's experts, our access to the corporate world, to the private sector, to the RBI, to the Ministry of Finance, to multilateral institutions like the World Bank and the IMF is very, very high. And students actually use us as a platform to maintain a continuous dialogue between what's happening in the industry. Now, because the curriculum is rigorous, applied, and students have hands-on training and dialogue with industry, they become far more employable than students from other universities, which is why we've always had a very, very strong track record when it comes to placements and internships. Over the last 5 years, more than 90 to 95% of our students have got jobs in internships. Even this year in January, we've secured 100% record for internships. And as we speak, full-time placements are going on. So I won't bore you with the contents of our flagship program, which is the postgraduate diploma in economics. You can go to our website and hear more. The course starts with a foundations course. It's very, very quantitative. We help students understand and get a good grips on maths and stats. We move on to core courses where we cover the essentials of economics, and we also teach all our students how to deal with big data, learn programming on R and Python. Lastly, while it's a diploma in economics, we offer 3 specializations: finance, public policy, and data analytics. And in the second semester, students have to make a choice between these 3 specializations, or can actually cross-specialize and take modules across the specializations and then get their diploma. So Shagata is very closely involved in the public policy specialization. As you can see, he teaches 2 courses, the theory of public policy and a course on behavioral and experimental economics, a flavor of which you got today. We are the only academy in India today offering a course, a proper credit course on behavioral and experimental economics. You have organizations offering one or either, but there are none that are offering a combination of both. Now, as I spoke about some of our student outcomes, a lot of you are worried about what kind of career opportunities do I have as an economist? Well, I'm proud to say that economics, especially applied economics, is an extremely conducive and fungible set of skills that is used across industries, across companies. So here you can see our students. These are companies that have hired typically from the academy over the past 5 years. You will see companies in the banking and finance vertical, consulting vertical, analytics vertical, and the policy industry vertical that have found value in our students. Our students have made it to some of the largest firms, not only in India, but across the world. They're working as investment bankers, portfolio managers, strategy consultants, treasury economists, machine learning experts, and public policy experts. So these are some of the companies that regularly hire full-time as well as interns from the academy. Now, while we've had a lot of success in the corporate world, some of our students have, after a few years or after graduating from the academy, also wanted to super specialize in leading universities across the world. Some of the Ivy League universities, if you look at Georgetown, you look at Rotman, you look at Columbia, you look at Harvard, have all accepted students from the Meghnad Desai Academy for various courses. Could be master's programs, MBA programs, or even direct PhD programs. And in fact, not only have they accepted our students, but our students have been recipients of, Dean scholarships, Chevening scholarships, and research grants. So apart from having a choice of entering the corporate world, you also have an opportunity to study at some of the global universities which are now recognizing our program. So as Indian students, we typically want to keep our options open. We always like to hedge our bets, right? So I'm very happy to say that at the academy, within just 1 year, students are able to find opportunities in the corporate world as well as qualify for master's programs and PhD programs in the Western world. This is a little bit about our student outcomes. You can obviously read a little more on our website. As I was saying, at the academy, we have a very, very strong access to experts, leading academics, policy makers, and private sector leaders that often come to the academy to have a chat with our students. So we run a very successful corporate mentorship program. Each and every one of our students is assigned a corporate mentor throughout the year. Regular visitors like RBI governors, like founders of firms like Infosys, like India's chief economic advisor, regularly come to the academy, conduct workshops, engage our students, and talk to them about how the real world actually functions. So the concepts of what is required in a real proper job market are explained to all our students. So this is just a look at some of the eminent speakers that we've had over the past few years. Here is a quick snapshot of our faculty. Of course, you've heard today from Shagata, but you will see we have other expert faculties that have PhDs from some of the best schools across the world. We not only hire academicians, but also hire experts from the corporate world. So you will see, two of our other faculty members, Dr. Tenaikar and Mrs. Prachi, who've left their leadership positions across some of the largest organizations globally and are now training our students. So for all the students who are identifying what they can do at the end of graduation, I must encourage you to apply to the academy. I must encourage you to have a look at our program. We've trained students from colleges like LSR, SRCC, Miranda, Satyavati, Guru Gobind Singh, and various other universities from Delhi, and I'm sure that you will find value in our program. Our admissions are now open. We have a few seats remaining, and we're going to be starting our course in July 2020. So with this, thank you for listening to me. I just have a very quick video that I'm going to play. It'll tell you a little bit about what the students and academics think about the academy, and then I will hand it over to Shagata to answer some questions. So just bear with me. I'm going to play the video in just about a minute.
I've been with MD sort of on the ground floor, so to say, in 2014.
The one thing that differentiates MBA is really its network. Based in Bombay, it has a fantastic network and interface with the industry. There were senior CFOs at my organization who was already involved with this, and that is how I came to know about MBA.
The world obviously has changed very rapidly from going back to a certain way of teaching by rote and learning by rote. It has changed dramatically.
Basically, teach economics as if I were telling them about their own lives.
Students who have studied economics very often do not have the tools to enter into a corporate economist's job. So therefore, the whole idea was that can we design a course which is intensive in economics knowledge but also provides students with the tools needed for a job in the corporate sector. So it was this marriage of theory and practice.
Here, we of course refer to books and all, but we also constantly make them aware of what's going on around the world and how you can analyze those things from the stuff that you learn, right?
MBA as an institution itself offers so much diversity in the subjects that you can pick, in the experiences that you gather, that I think it's a very good base to take off into any professional venture.
These mentors make us feel extremely comfortable to talk about anything and everything under the sun.
The kind of training that I got there in just 1 year, I am a lot more confident to work with numbers.
MBA is not a place where you just hone your economic abilities or finance abilities or what the course is all about. It's also it's a discovery of yourself during the journey. Like whatever I thought I wouldn't be able to do, I was pushed to do that.
I know they get people from the RBI or IDFC think tank or Lord Meghnad, Desai himself and other noted economists all over the world are able to come and give them a very good perspective. Now that interaction with these people is something which is really important. We didn't get that when we were studying, and having that dialogue and knowing how people are practicing what they're learning on a day-to-day basis is very, very.
I mean, Reliance Industries have been recruiting from MBA for the past 3 years.
We hired one of the people from the institute and who turned out to be actually outstanding. Performed better than most people that we have hired from MBA institutions.
I think what you really take away from here are certain skills that you can use across the board, regardless of your career choices, regardless of whatever path it is that you choose to pursue.
So thank you so very much for having a look at that video and giving me the opportunity to introduce the Academy. Shagata, over to you. Would be great if you could take some questions now.
Yes, thanks Karan. So let me do that. There are a lot of very, very interesting questions that are coming up. So let's start with them. Let me, okay, so Anshu says, other than the theories you discussed, what are the few measures that government is likely to take to improve economic situation in India after lockdown is over? This is a question a lot of you have spoken about. Similar, Tanya is also asking similarly. So there was another question that was similar here, which was Anshu was asking is how nudge theory could be used of controlling today's situation other than social distancing. So what else could be done, right? That was something Pranav was also asking. Other than social distancing, how can we use what we have learned today, behavioral economics and nudge theories to help? So let's say, I mean, one important thing, and that so that sort of seems to be one theme of questions. One is basically this idea that that of course what is happening right now is not a nudge, right? We are under a lockdown, and the lockdown is not a nudge. Why is it not a nudge? Because it's a mandate. We don't have a choice, right? This leads to Shreya's question that is nudge theory right approach to tackle current situation in a country like UK where the cases are increasing every now and then, right? So that's true. So at this point, it's not, the answer is no, right? The answer is not no, but the answer is that it's not enough. At this point, when we are almost like a war footing to deal with the situation, merely nudging people is not enough. Therefore, you need stronger action than that, right? You don't want to give people because why? A nudge is something that keeps your liberty. So if you want to avoid it, you can avoid it costlessly, right? Which is why GST is not a nudge, which some of you asked, and then somebody else already answered that question, that it's not a nudge because you don't really have a choice. There is serious consequence. So therefore, at this point, the lockdown is a mandate. We have to stay at home, and there are consequences if we go out, right? So at this point, merely nudging people is not going to be enough. But the lockdown will not continue indefinitely. It will continue till 3rd of May. Maybe it will continue more than that, but it will not continue indefinitely. Why? Because even, maybe we want to continue the lockdown for 6 months to really flatten the curve. But that's not feasible. In a country like India, or perhaps in no country, you can afford to do that because the economic consequences is going to be just too much to bear, right? So no government will be able to do that. So at some point, you have to remove the lockdown. And at that point, the most important question would have been, what is your exit strategy? You certainly don't want to remove all restrictions at the same time. Then that will just lead to chaos and a second wave of hike in cases, which we are seeing in China right now and other places, a second wave, right? So therefore, at that point, your exit strategy is where nudges and behavioral insights will come in, right? So how can you design an effective exit strategy by influencing human behavior so that people still maintain social distancing, so that those who don't want to go out still remains inside, and only those which is absolutely essential, you slowly start doing that, right? So there are lots of these sort of policy prescriptions that are going around. One of them is, okay, you start by first letting people who are between 20 to 40 first go out, and then elder people, etc. So that would be one possible. Of course, all these policies have their pros and cons, right? Or exit strategy on different places could be that, okay, you allow airline travels only if you really, really require it, but you only provide tickets, seats for one passenger in a row, and you alternate between window and aisle. So there you still maintain social distancing, whereas not everyone, where those who really need to fly are still being able to fly. Maybe the same will be done in movie theaters, right? Maybe you will only provide one seat and then 3 seats empty and then the 4th one, or maybe more than that, right? So places like that, you won't be able to get into the store. You have to maybe have a queue. Only certain number of people will be let into a store at the same time, and you will have those white circles. Maybe they'll continue to maintain social distancing, etc. So there are different ways in which you can be done. One big way that the government can do, apart from this particular way of maintaining social distancing, that was a question one of you asked, is that the government can nudge people to adopt more and more technology. So one thing that has become pretty, that has emerged out of this is that the way we work, the way we learn, the way we study, that's changing rapidly because of this, right? So work from home has probably going to change the way companies work forever. Studying from home in the same way is going to change the way education is provided everywhere. So all of that is not just going to go away right after the lockdown are going to go up, right? So adoption of technology, if governments can take ways such that it nudges institutions to adopt technologies. A good start would be from its own institution, right? So if government schools, government colleges, right, like Delhi University, schools in Delhi and elsewhere, if they can start adopting technology, whereby you can provide in some way, you can still do your class, you can still do education, but not necessarily having 40 people or 80 people in a room, then that would be really, really helpful, right? I mean, you can't keep schools closed forever. At some point, I mean, you can keep schools forever closed, but you can't keep teaching forever closed, right? So you still have to do that. So adoption of various technologies. Now, some universities are doing that. For example, we at the academy, we have not lost a single day's lecture because of the virus, and we stopped our classrooms way before the lockdown was announced. but we have just moved virtual, and we do it the same way we are doing this webinar, actually even more, because we can see and interact with our students. It's almost like a virtual classroom. But that's not necessarily how, but that has to grow much deeper, right? Primary schools in rural villages have to some point adopt that, right? So how do you nudge that kind of model? So that's really, really important. How do you nudge people to take up professions who are daily wage workers? How do you ensure that they can still go by, right? Because they're the ones who are facing the economic consequences the most. Yes, advertising is a way of nudge, which can go both, good and bad way, depending on the motivation, on the intention. Yeah, that's a very good question, Avni. So, to what extent nudging interventions can be transparent without losing effectiveness? So, to a lot, right? So, because being transparent is really, really important. So, all the nudges that essentially, governments do or academicians do, they're all transparent because they have to go through certain ethical guidelines, ethical evaluations. So nudges need to be transparent. At the same time, there is a trade-off, right? If I tell you that, oh, I am doing this because I want you to nudge in a certain way, then it probably stops efficacy. So there is a certain balance. It can't be completely transparent in the sense that you can't tell people that you're trying to nudge them in a certain direction, then it sort of loses it. But also at the same time, you should be transparent as much as possible. And what is as much as possible? What is the line? The line is that you should not deceive people, right? You should not tell them that you're trying to do one thing where your objective is really something else. And how permanent the effects are, that's a good question, right? So if I keep on using the same nudge, how long it'll take? That's an answer. That's a question that doesn't have clear answer. So for some nudges, the effects are long-lasting. For some nudges, the effects go away if you keep doing it time to time. So the answer, it depends on the context. Yeah, Bhavya, I did read your question. I was going to get to that. That was at the very top. Okay. So what about randomized control trials? So yeah, let me talk a little bit about randomized control trials. What are randomized control trials? That's something that has been quite popular in the media in the last few months. That's the idea that Abhijit and Esther popularized. They didn't come up with it, but they popularized it in terms of social policy. So the idea is very simple. The idea is that basically there is a well, actually, let me give you an example of the idea from a randomized control trial that I'm doing right now. So currently we are doing a randomized control trial with the Department of Education in Maharashtra. So we are conducting an RCT in schools in Kolhapur, with school children in Kolhapur. The objective is that we have an intervention, and the objective is to increase waste segregation and plastic recycling among school children. So what we are doing is basically, so how does this RCT kind of works, is that there are two groups, treatment group and control group. So we have lots of schools in Kolhapur, and we are doing this in a particular block in Kolhapur called Sahuari. So in that block there are lots of schools, right? So we took all the schools and we randomized. Randomized meaning that we tossed a coin for each school, and we decided, okay, if it's head, it gets into treatment school. If it's tail, it does not get into treatment school. It gets into control school. So it's purely random. There's nothing about the school that we are picking and choosing. And those schools who got into the treatment group, we basically implemented the intervention there. The intervention is a 8-week digital curriculum that teaches the kids about waste segregation and plastic recycling. So those schools which were in the treatment group, they received the curriculum. They saw they saw the curriculum, and the control group schools did not receive the curriculum. And then what we did is basically we compared their attitude and behavior and knowledge about waste segregation between the treatment and the control group schools. And we compare if the treatment group schools do better than control group. If they do, then it is because of our curriculum, because that's the only thing that differs between the two groups, right? So that's an example of a randomized control trial. And that kind of randomized control trials have been done by a lot by researchers like Abhijit and Esther. Okay. If lockdown extends for a longer period of time, what nudges can help so that people do not violate it? Because people might get frustrated with staying at home and not working and start going out. Yes. So therefore, you need to nudge people to stay at home. There are nudges like that. I mean, of course, the government has already started doing some, right? What is it? Like showing Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? That's a nudge because that's trying to keep you at home, right? So maybe the government can go take more steps like that. So what nudges can we do? Of course, Aryan is correct. Lockdown is not a nudge. It's an order, right? You have to follow it. But it does not mean that lockdown cannot be complemented with nudges, right? So showing Ramayana and Mahabharata is a nudge. Maybe for, maybe you guys would not be absolutely thrilled to stay at home and watch Ramayana and Mahabharata. Maybe that will feel dated to you. So maybe you want to see different contents, right? So maybe the government might give you free Netflix for the next 6 months, right? To stay at home, or things like that. So different nudges could happen. So maybe government, people from government can go and provide, toys and storybooks for young children who are missing class and can stay at home, and then have digital, some sort of digital interaction, so that to make sure that they're learning. Maybe Byju's app can be made free for next 6 months. Maybe government pays for it and subsidizes it. So those could be nudges to make you stay at home, right? If you go out, then there's a punishment that the cops can catch you. But there could still be nudges to keep you at home. Right? So there are things that will make it interesting for us to be at home, something like that, right? Because you're right. At some point, you might get frustrated. Sorry, Karan, you were.
Yeah, Shagata, sorry.
Are we out of time?
Oh, we are actually. We're just in a minute. We have to start the second one.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So thanks a lot, guys. That was a very, very interesting questions. I'm sorry I couldn't answer all of them, but I've tried to touch upon the main themes. And of course, a lot of it was on the lockdown, rightly so. So keep thinking about this. Keep thinking about how we can use this behavioral insights into lockdowns. Write to us if you come up with interesting ideas. It was great pleasure interacting with all of you. So stay home, stay safe, and keep thinking about nudges. All right.
Thank you so much, guys.
Final comments?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Once again, a big thank you to all the students, to Professor Malini Sharma. We are really grateful for you to set this up. A big thank you to all the other faculty members that are on the webinar. I'm sorry I don't know your names, but I do know several other faculty have joined. And of course, lastly but not the least, thank you to the principal, Dr. Roy, for facilitating this. We hope this is the start of a long-term relationship with Daulatram. To the students, please follow us on our social media handles and visit the website often. Of course, we are an option for you to consider for your postgraduate, degree. And if at all you are looking at interesting content or interesting sessions, please follow us and we will keep you updated. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Stay safe and see you on the other side of this. Thank you.
Thank you.